to date, and staff has proposed that we carry forward in that there is an analysis and a determination that adequate financial assurance as required by the 700 series rules is in place prior to the director being able to issue a recommendation on an OGDP. And that they're in compliance with the annual well registration and fee requirements.
Commissioner Gonzalez, did you want to weigh in?
I want to let Commissioner Mcgowan make sure she's satisfied with her discussion on this topic before I add something also in the 300 series.
Yep, I am satisfied. And I have two other issues I'd like to talk about before we all hang up.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Mcgowan, and thank you, Director Murphy, for that clarification. We had one request for clarification in the rules, similar along the same lines about if a director will require additional financial assurance as part of an OGDP application, that be made, that be clarified, that's a COA prior to construction, prior to actual activity, as opposed to a increase of financial assurance at the time of an application or at the time of a permit approval. I don't think that's necessary for rule language. I think the rule language is pretty well open, and all these OGDPs will come to us for approval anyways. And I think that we can make that clear. I think if anything, perhaps it's could be SPP language. But in general, it was a concern that was brought up. I think the timing for additional financial assurance associated with OGDPs is an important consideration, given that not all permits get drilled, immediately upon approval. And so I think that it is appropriate that that financial assurance become due if it's not about meeting the adequacy of their financial assurance in general, but if it's additional financial assurance that become due prior to any real dirt work or any actual activities on site. So more of a Form 2A COA is where it would be appropriate.
I see nodding of heads and director working on it. If we're good with that, do we want to go to Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One is just a clarification, because I think I heard from testimony over the weeks that folks were interested in some sort of a grant program for folks who were plugging wells in the state's orphan well portfolio. And my understanding is that already exists, but no one has yet ever kind of taken advantage of it. Clearly, everyone's just jumping up and down to plug state orphan wells. So I just wanted to clarify that that exists for people to utilize. And then the second piece, and I'm sorry, I'm brain dead, so I can't remember. I thought someone had put maybe in the written testimony or verbal that they wanted to make sure that injection wells were not counted in the well count for average production. And is that clear then in our wells that it doesn't count?
If I may, I think right now the way the rules are written, those wells would be included in calculating a daily per well production, average daily per well production.
And then, so I guess I would need some clarity or some thoughts about whether that request and your staff's thoughts about it.
Currently, so under current rules, injection wells are bonded akin to any other type of well bore that we regulate from an excess and active standpoint and a calculation. And I think we've carried that through in terms of calculating the per well production, and also accounting those wells would be accounted for in when we're looking in a blanket bond scenario. those wells would require bonding based on, where the operator falls based on their well counts. And I'm sorry, I'm inarticulate. I should probably pull up the rule language and that might help me a little bit. They are part of the entirety of the system for an operator. We've proposed to include them. I understand the arguments against not including them. Or, yeah.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and this was something that I had a lot of discussion about kind of offline and thought about it. And I differed from the proponent's idea in terms of this. Where I fall on this, and it's a tough one because it's not, you're never going to get the benefit of production from an injection well. That being said, if you're under a blanket bonding scenario, you are getting the benefit of that well being covered under your blanket bond. And so these wells do need financial assurance. They do need the coverage, and I'm comfortable with it as is. If you're going to get the benefit of it being under a blanket bond for financial assurance, then that should come in accordance with it being included in your production threshold. I think that if you had operators who are solely injection well operators, that they would fall specifically under an option 5, or if their portfolio heavily skews towards injection wells, I think that is a unique circumstance as we've contemplated it to fall under option 5. But in general, I'm not terribly aligned. I'd entertain arguments the other way, but I'm not terribly aligned with removing those. It's kind of fallen into the structure as it's been in the past and as it is contemplated now, and I'm comfortable moving forward with it in that way.
Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the conversation and that you put some thought into, Commissioner Gonzalez. And I just wanted to make sure that we had a discussion that was covered. And I feel good that our setup is good unless someone has heartburn about it.
Commissioner Najapa, did you raise your hand?
I didn't raise my hand, but I do have a couple of issues, but I want to make sure that Commissioner McGowan's good with her. Okay.
I think
Okay.
she
And yeah,
just said she's good, so go ahead.
okay, great. So I just had a couple of things. I wanted to revisit our single well financial assurance calculations. And one thing that I had in my notes was offsite facilities and flow lines, and whether or not we feel that we're covered enough with what we've come up with, or whether we need to have some sort of additional consideration for those.
Well, why don't you explain whether you think we are in a good spot or not, and if not, why?
Well, I guess maybe one question to pose to all of you is, if we're talking about like a tank battery that's kind of off by itself somewhere, would that be a single location that would then, it wouldn't, because it wouldn't have any wells, would it then be 100,000? How would we do that? That's my question, I guess. I guess that's what I would also potentially propose, but.
Commissioner Messner?
So I've given a little bit of thought to this, and I mean, it's a tough one for me. And so I think there are certain production facilities, tank batteries that are associated with multiple wells. And then there are some that are associated with one well. If it's associated with one well, then that's easy. It's associated with the well. If it's associated with multiple wells, that's another calculation. The other problem too is whether or not it's associated with a low producing well or a high producing well. But I'll offer consideration. So one thought I had is that if it's 1 tank or less, 1 acre disturbance or less, then that should be associated with a well. Even if it's a multiple well facility, it should be associated with a well. If that one well gets plugged and abandoned and there's still other wells associated with it, then it would get associated with another well on the gathering system. If it is a site that has more than 1 tank or more than 1 acre of disturbance, then I think it should be considered an independent site and have independent financial assurance associated with that, whether that's blanket bonding insurance or single well financial assurance. Although I don't know how you determine whether it's low producing if it's a tank battery. So this is why I think it's complicated, but that's my was like my first crack at it. But I think it's a difficult question, and so I mean I want to lean on staff who have better experience at this than I do. So I mean that's just my crack at it.
Chair, if I can,
Go ahead.
I think it does account for it, Commissioner Nanjapa, because we're starting with the location itself as a cost, and then and then adding a plugging cost. And we're doing that. So if you think about development in the DJ Basin where you have multiple wells that are producing to a single production facility, I think in aggregate, the location bump up, including and included, sorry, let me step back. So if you have 4 wells producing to the same production facility, for each of those 4 wells, you're going to collect $100 and probably $30,000. And I think that, so collectively, you're talking about close to $500,000 to reclaim all of the wells and the associated production facilities. So I do think it works together. It's not perfect. And yes, we could do it differently. Sorry for everybody who wants to see a 3-year-old tape my hair. It's coming very quickly.
Hi, Walter. No, I thank you, Director Murphy, and thank you, Commissioner Master. I think, you know, generally, I think that's, I'm looking back and I did have a note that, you know, most of those are going to be associated at least with 1 well. I think, you know, with one of the examples that you gave, Commissioner Messner, about, you know, a tank battery that, or a gathering system or whatever that's connected to multiple wells, I wonder if we should, you know, consider that like a multi-well pad, or, well, I guess, and I guess what I'm really going with this is I just want to make sure that we're at least addressing this in the SBP language, that these calculations will apply to those types of facilities, and how, and maybe Director Murphy, with what you just articulated, that we can just kind of make sure that that's in the SBP. But I'm comfortable with what you all are mentioning.
Everybody else comfortable here?
I just had a couple more things, if I may, Mr.
Go
Chair.
ahead.
Okay. So this one, we didn't specifically, I don't think, address, but I had raised it previously, which was the inactive wells, and a time frame overall for a well staying inactive. I have, you know, discussed this with a few stakeholders, and you know, didn't have much pushback about, you know, the general idea. I think the thing I want to avoid, similar to what came up when Commissioner Mcgowan was discussing out of service wells, is I don't want to have a scenario where we have out of service inactive wells, even if they're bonded up, just sitting there for years on end. So I just wanted to throw that out again and see if anybody else feels similarly, and if not, I can drop this issue. But I think that's, to me, that's something important that I think we should have some boundaries on.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the consideration there, Commissioner Najapa. I think between, the Rule 211 used and useful hearing, that determination there, and being able to determine through a hearing whether it's used or useful in situations where, a local government or a surface owner or a, may be interested in not having it sit perpetually inactive. I think there's other rules associated with being inactive that would encourage that to be plugged and abandoned as well. And the fact that there is a requirement for single well financial assurance on that well. I feel like there's checks and balances there. I'm not really sure right now. And we need to go any further on that as far as putting an unlimited, a time specific to it. But so I guess that's kind of where I'm thinking about that right now. I don't know if, I think we've got the checks and balances in place currently, but I could be convinced differently if I'm not thinking of something.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
I'll just agree with Commissioner Messner there.
Commissioner Najapa.
No, thank you. I appreciate you all just taking that into consideration. I'm good with that since there are no kind of additional strong feelings on setting some time frames for that. But okay, so the last thing I have is just revisiting what we were discussing with respect to single well financial assurance and the plug and pay concept, plug and pay, whatever it is. And so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this, and I'm so sorry that I'm just very dense about this today. So are we saying that, in looking at the rule, there's no sort of like, there's no specific language about like a first year deposit, let's say. I mean, there's the presumptive amount that gets paid each year. And so I'm assuming that the credits won't apply until the second year at least. But if an operator, let's say, again, with the example that I gave before, is $1 million, they're option 3, so they're paying 5% in. So $50,000 a year is what they're obligated to pay. They're plugging wells, at a clip where they're spending more than 50,000 or around 50,000 or whatever it is. So they're getting a credit then for subsequent years. And if they're doing that on a regular basis, then all we have is 50,000 in the account. Do I understand that correctly? And so we're comfortable with that? I guess I'm not entirely comfortable with that.
Chair?
Go ahead.
Yeah, the reason I'm comfortable with that, Commissioner Najapa, is because they're plugging wells. And I think that if they're plugging wells at a 1-for-1 clip, then at any point, if they walk away, we're in the same position as a state. Either we have that percentage of funds in the bank and we can do something with it, or they plugged that percentage of their portfolio, in which case we have effectively the same exposure from an orphan well program. So that's why I'm comfortable with it, is to encourage the operator to take care of their plugging, as opposed to just building up a bank that they could walk away from and then it ends up with the orphan well program. I'd rather have the operator plug those wells than the orphan well program plug those wells. And I really think that kind of 1-for-1 and the limit that we've contemplated on capping that credit on a single well financial assurance amount really helps put that sideboard on it for me.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Commissioner Gonzalez. I guess I totally understand. I completely agree that we want to encourage the plugging. The more wells that get plugged, the better. I am a little concerned, though, still, that if something catastrophic could happen and an operator walks away, and all we have is 5% in the bank, that feels really minimal to me, which is why I was kind of advocating for this minimum balance to be built up in there. But I don't think I've swayed anybody. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood where everybody was on that and that we had a little more discussion on it. So again, I appreciate the explanations.
Commissioner Messner, then Commissioner McGowan, then Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think two things. One, I would just ask, I haven't done the math. I mean, I believe the math is correct, but sometime between now and the development of the draft, the red line, I just want to confirm that 225 and 125 gets to 10 million. Because I don't want to make a mistake on that, because my goal is 10 million. And so I want to make sure that whatever fixed fee amount we put in the rules here does get to 10 million. So I'd like to just check and balance that a little bit. And then the other piece is there was a suggestion around release of financial assurance. And I just want to throw that out for discussion. It was the language to be considered was a procedure for operator to pursue release of financial assurance. And the language is an operator may file an application for a financial assurance hearing pursuant to Rule 502G11 for the director or commission's failure to timely release all or part of an operator's financial assurance pursuant to Rule 706A. Wanted to throw that out for discussion as a consideration for addition to the rules here.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Commissioner Messner. That was the last thing I had left on my list. It's super important to me. I've mentioned this before, we talked a lot about these rules in terms of how we're going to get the money in to protect the state, but we're talking about large buildups of funds, of capital that's not accessible to operators. And I do think it's important that we close that loop of the whole process. I would support the language that was proposed that Commissioner Messner outlined. I think it's important that there's the opportunity to at least be heard by the commission should an operator feel that an unreasonable delay is occurring in the release of their financial assurance subsequent to them meeting everything under 706A and subsequent to their filing of a Form 3A. I'm comfortable with the unreasonable delay language. I don't know if it's better or worse or more practical or less practical to have a set time frame in there. I think that we don't really know what it's going to look like under this new regime in terms of when we get to that full circle. So I'm comfortable with the unreasonable delay language and the request for a hearing on that basis.
Commissioner
Chair, can
Director
you,
Murphy.
sorry, yeah, Commissioner Messner, can you kind of start over?
Sure. I can also state that this language is in well, I'll just read it to you. It's in a pre-hearing statement as well. Not a pre-hearing statement, but the last statements that we received. But so the language is procedure for an operator to pursue release of financial assurance. An operator may file an application for a financial assurance hearing pursuant to Rule 502G11 for the director or commission's failure to timely release all or part of an operator's financial assurance pursuant to Rule 706A. So the other topic that I would bring up, and this is suggested language for statement of basis and purpose, but I still like the idea, particularly around the out of service plugging list and just kind of plugging in abandonment in general, the idea of encouraging communication of the activities within disproportionately impacted communities. I think that having, workover rigs come in and do this plugging and abandonment can be misconstrued as drilling new wells. It does create additional activity within, these particular areas. And I would just like to see some language that encourages operators to communicate, to just create that dialogue and transparency and that extra effort within disproportionately impacted communities. And so I just put that out for discussion as language suggestions within the statement of basis and purpose.
Does that cover it, Commissioner Messmer? All right. Any other matters for consideration? Going once. Hey there, Walter. All right. Can you wave? We see you. Great way to end. I think we have gotten through our issue list. We have deliberated and we have provided direction to staff for one final turn of a red line. Director Murphy, I did have one final question for you. Do you have a sense of timing in terms of staff turnaround and when you might want us to reconvene for final deliberation?
I think that's a great question. I think we can get revised staff rules, out on Friday. And then hopefully if we can talk on maybe Tuesday for a final discussion. I did check with staff. We don't have final 2021 production numbers finalized yet. So in terms of assessing the per well fee, it's a reasonable estimate based on running 2020 numbers, and I can walk through that on Tuesday as well and try to dial it in a little bit more closely with either what we do know now or at least accounting for well changes. And so Commissioner Messner, I think we can get the best data that we have right now, recognizing that 2021 data was due on the 15th of this month, and it takes staff 30 days to work through it, correct errors, and make sure it's complete. So we'll get right on that and have information for you on the actual fee calculation. When I ran the numbers using 2020 production data and 2020 well counts, admittedly well counts are off by about 1,000. It generated around 10.3 million. It generated around 10.3 million.
Okay, thank you, Director Murphy. We'll let you go. Okay, with that, I think we have concluded the business of the commission today. And a couple of procedural matters. So for the 92 folks that are with us, as you heard from the director, we would anticipate posting a final red line to the February 11th draft on this Friday. That will also be sent to all parties that are parties to the work that we're doing here. We will then we will be looking to adjourn to Tuesday, March 1st at 9 a.m. At which time we would undertake final deliberations on that last draft. I am going to suggest to my fellow commissioners that we keep the record open with a caveat that I at least don't want to talk to anybody between now and the time the red line comes out. And I want to spend some time with the red line before we have reach outs. So looking at fellow commissioners, does that seem fair? Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up, some nodding of heads. So message is delivered, that record is open, which means we can still have stakeholder discussions, but the commissioners are interested in getting the red line into their hands and reviewing it before they might reach out to parties about sort of the final place that we're seeing this go. Commissioner Mcgowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, sorry, could you explain if this is kind of where we're heading? What we're doing on Tuesday and what opportunity there is for folks who still have, I'm going to call them hair on fire issues related to what we put together.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. From at least this commissioner's perspective, those folks with hair on fire can contact commissioners over the weekend after the red line comes out, have one-on-one discussions, raise issues to us. We can do the same back to stakeholders, but that's part of this process. But the meeting on Tuesday is for commissioners to finally deliberate on the product. We do have the opportunity, as I mentioned at one point today, that if there is an issue that is deserving of us talking to a stakeholder, a party at the hearing Tuesday, we could call somebody back up. We always have that right. So far, we've not felt the need to do that. So that is how I would advise in terms of your question. I would also wonder if AG Davenport would like to appear and if he would like to weigh in at all on your question, on this issue, on next steps, et cetera. Thank you, AG Davenport.
Happy to, Mr. Chair. Commissioner McGowan, I believe your question was just sort of clarification on what opportunities there are. So if the commission does not close the record, as it appears you will not, that does allow you commissioners to have individual, meaning just a single commissioner and a party, have substantive conversations in the interim. You are not obligated to have those conversations. I will note that there were opportunities for public comment. There were opportunities for parties to submit written statements and make presentations to you. All of those opportunities have passed now. And so you have no obligation, no legal obligation to speak to anyone at this point. If you close the record, then that prohibits anyone from reaching out to you or you reaching out to anyone else. So the record remains open. You can speak individually to parties, but you are not obligated to do so. And my understanding of your intent is you've expressed a desire not to have any of those communications until after the red line comes out, which is planned for Friday. And as the chair mentioned, you are still have the option to call a party back up next Tuesday and receive and ask them questions, get their feedback in open hearing as an entire commission.
Thank you for that summary, AG Davenport. I guess another reminder that I would send amongst ourselves and to our stakeholders is, as we have said a number of times, the rules that we're developing have to be looked at holistically. And we have made initial determinations of where we think holistically this all fits together, but we've not finalized that yet. And that's what the time for the red line and looking at it and ensuring each of ourselves that holistically we're at the right spot makes sense. So I just keep that caveat out there, is that we are That's where we're at now. And Tuesday, March 1st is considered to be the date in which we would make final decisions on all of these issues. Anything else for the good of the cause? I would also remind us that we're meeting tomorrow morning under a regular business agenda at 9 a.m. And with that, I would look for a motion to adjourn until Tuesday, March 1st at 9 a.m.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? We're adjourned.